city looked different before sunrise, quieter than usual. Almost like everything stopped trying so hard for a couple hours. You had your shoes off in the passenger seat, holding coffee between both hands, talking about random memories like you were too tired to filter them anymore. I remember the way your voice sounded, half awake, half somewhere else, and the way every red light downtown reflected across the dashboard. At some point the conversation faded, and we just listened to the music instead, watching empty intersections pass by, one after another in silence. There's something about late nights turning into mornings that makes people honest. Before sunrise, everything feels different. The streets, the lights, even the way we think. Before sunrise, nothing feels too far away. The whole world slows down just long enough to stay. You ask me if I think people are supposed to find something bigger in life. I laughed and said I'm still trying to figure that out myself. You smiled at that answer, then looked back out the window again. And somehow that small moment still comes back to me sometimes. The sky was starting to turn blue slowly, cars appearing more often now. And I remember wishing quietly the night had lasted a little longer. Some memories stay because they felt real, not because they were perfect. Before sunrise, everything feels different. The streets, the lights, even the way we think. Before sunrise, nothing feels too far away. The whole world slows down just long enough to stay. When I finally parked outside your apartment, neither one of us moved right away. The rain finally started slowing down, street lights reflecting on the road. You were quiet in the passenger seat, watching the city move slowly past us. The heater made the windows fog up, and the music played somewhere low, not loud enough to interrupt anything, just enough to fill the silence. You asked me if I ever think about how fast people drift apart, then smile before I answered, like maybe you already knew. And for a second, everything outside the car disappeared. So we kept driving after the rain, through empty streets and fading lights. No daylight. You started talking about old memories, people you haven't seen in years. I remember the way you laughed softly halfway through one of the stories, then looked out the window again like you got lost in the thought of it. There are nights that disappear completely, and others that stay for no clear reason. And somehow I already knew this would become one of them. Some moments don't feel important immediately, until you realize later you still remember every detail. So we kept driving after the rain, through empty streets and fading lights. No destination, nowhere important, just trying to hold on to the night. And something about that moment felt warmer than it should, like the world finally slowed down long enough for us to breathe. Eventually, your street came into view, but neither one of us mentioned it right away. You asked if I could keep driving a little longer, so I passed your street without saying anything. The roads were still wet from the rain, and the whole city looked half asleep. There was an old song playing quietly, one we both kinda knew. You started humming parts of it, then forgot the words halfway through. I remember you laughing about that and saying you were tired, but neither one of us really wanted the night to end yet. Some nights feel normal while they happen and stay in your head for months after. So we kept driving through empty streets, talking about random things, old memories, people we miss, places we said we'd visit someday. And for a little while, everything felt strangely easy, like there was nowhere else to be except right there in that car. We stopped at a red light downtown, and you asked me if I think people change. I said probably a little, and you just nodded at the window. The heater was making too much noise, my coffee had gone completely cold, and the windows kept fogging up every few minutes again. At some point we both went quiet, just listening to the road beneath us. And honestly, that part might be what I remember most. Not every moment has to mean something huge. Sometimes it just feels good to stay in it. So we kept driving through empty streets, talking about random things, old memories, people we miss, places we said right there in that car. Eventually I parked outside your place, but we stayed sitting there for one more song. Neither one of us saying much, like leaving too soon would ruin it somehow. Funny how certain nights feel important before they're even over. So we went for one more drive past the bridge and downtown lights, talking like we had nowhere to be, and all the time in the world tonight. And honestly, I can't remember every word, just the feeling of not wanting that moment to end too early. At some point you got quiet, watching rainbow across the windows, then asked me if I ever miss older versions of myself. I laughed a little before answering, because I knew exactly what you meant. Some people disappear slowly without even noticing it themselves. The heater barely worked, your hands were cold the whole night, so you kept them hidden in your sleeves while the radio hummed quietly. There are nights that don't look special, but stay with you anyway. So we went for one more drive past the bridge and downtown lights, talking like we had nowhere to be, and all the time in the world tonight. And honestly, I can't remember every word, just the feeling of not wanting that moment to end too early. When I finally dropped you off, you smiled and said, "Drive safe," and somehow that felt heavier than it should have. The radio was low enough that I could hear the rain outside. You were staring out the passenger window, tracing shapes into the fog glass. I asked what you were thinking about. You said nothing important, but the way you said it made it sound like it probably was. We passed the same gas station twice without either of us noticing at first. And when we realized, you just laughed and told me to keep going. There was something nice about that night. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated. Just two tired people avoiding going home too early. Some nights feel softer than others, like the world finally quieted down and the radio stayed low while the city lights moved slowly. Every street looked different somehow through the rain and tired eyes. We didn't need to say much. The silence already said enough. And for a couple hours, that was more than enough for me. You started talking about childhood memories, little random things you hadn't mentioned before, like songs your parents used to play, or places that don't exist anymore. I remember thinking how easy it felt listening to you. No pressure to answer perfectly, no need to turn the moment into something bigger. At one red light downtown, you looked over and smiled for no reason. And honestly, that might have been my favorite part of the whole night. Funny how small moments become memories without asking permission first. And the radio stayed low while the city lights moved slowly. Every street looked different somehow through the rain and tired eyes. We didn't need to say much. The silence already said enough. And for a couple hours, that was more than enough for me. When the last song faded out, neither one of us reached for the door right away. It was 2:43 in the morning. At least that's what the dashboard said. You were half asleep beside me, still holding your phone in your hand. The roads were completely empty, just reflections on wet pavement. And every traffic light we passed turned green before we reached it. You asked me if I ever think about how strange growing up feels. Like one day everyone stops asking what you actually want. I didn't know what to say, nothing expected anything from us. Windows fogging up again, late night thoughts and empty roads, while the whole city slept. And somehow in that moment everything felt strangely clear. Not perfect, not forever, just real enough to stay with me. You started humming to the music, almost too quietly to hear, then laughed when you noticed I was listening the whole time. There are moments that feel small while they're happening in real time. Then months later you realize you still remember every detail. The smell of rain through the window, the sound of tires on the road, the way you looked outside whenever you didn't know what to say. Maybe memories choose themselves long before we notice. Windows fogging up again, late night thoughts and empty roads, while the whole city slept. And somehow in that moment everything felt strangely clear. Not perfect, not forever, just real enough to stay with me. Eventually you fell asleep for a minute, and I kept driving a little slower after that. You said it was probably too late for coffee, and ordered one anyway. We sat in the drive-thru talking about things neither of us planned to mention. The girl at the window looked exhausted, street lights reflected across the hood, and your playlist was still playing quietly from the speakers in the backseat. You asked me if I ever miss people, even when I know they weren't good for me. I laughed because honestly, that question sounded way too familiar. The roads were almost empty after that, just taxis and buses downtown, and every conversation somehow felt deeper at that time of night. Maybe people tell the truth more easily when they're tired enough. It was too late for coffee, too late to be out driving, but neither one of us really wanted to go home yet. So we stayed out talking while the city slowly disappeared. And for a little while everything felt easier here. At some point you turned the music lower and started telling me old stories about people you haven't seen in years but still think about sometimes. I remember watching rain slide after, without them even noticing. It was too late for coffee, too late to be out driving, but neither one of us really wanted to go home yet. So we stayed out talking while the city slowly disappeared. And for a little while, everything felt easier here. Headlights reflecting on wet streets, everything glowing silver and gold. You were sitting with your knees pulled up, looking out at the city in silence. I asked if you were okay. You said, yeah, just thinking, and smiled a little afterward, like you didn't want to make it serious. There was an old deep house track playing, one we both heard too many times before. Still somehow that night, it sounded completely different. The roads kept stretching ahead of us, almost completely empty now. And I remember wishing quietly that there was nowhere we needed to be soon. Funny how calm the world feels sometimes when everyone else is asleep. Headlights on wet streets, music low in the background, late night conversations while the rain blurred the whole town. And for a couple hours, nothing outside the car mattered much, just the road beneath us, and you sitting close enough to touch. You started talking about old apartments, jobs you hated, people you thought would stay forever, but slowly disappeared anyway. I listened more carefully than usual, not because the stories were dramatic, just because hearing you talk like that felt strangely honest. At one point we missed your exit, and neither one of us mentioned it. You just looked over and smiled, like maybe that was intentional. Some moments don't need explanations to feel important later. Headlights on wet streets, music low in the background, late night conversations while the rain blurred the whole town. And for a couple hours, nothing outside the car mattered much, just the road beneath us, and you sitting close enough to touch. Eventually we circled back towards your place. but much slower than we needed to.